Thank you all very much for coming. This is our first of monthly talks and seminars from the Creative Industries Research and Innovation Network. During the talk, I'll add some links to our future seminars and also our Twitter handle so that you can follow us for news of upcoming events, including our Creative Industries Festival, which comes back in March. But today, we kick off the series with a discussion of the news industry and its role in times of international crisis. And we are very honoured to have the journalist, poet and staff writer for the Middle East Eye, Mustafa Abu Sneineh, with us today to share his experiences of writing home as a Palestinian national in the UK. His first poetry book, A Black Cloud at the End of the Line, was published in Arabic in 2016. He studied law at Birzeit, I'm sorry about my pronunciation, University in Palestine, before moving to London and studying for a master's in Postcolonial Studies. And now he reports on events in Palestine for Middle East Eye. And we're also very lucky to have Jack Royston, currently a UK-based correspondent writing for an American audience, who brings his 14 years as a news reporter to the task of interviewing Mustafa for us today. We welcome all of your questions. Please, throughout the talk, as they occur to you, just type them into the chat box and we'll come to them at the end. We'll save maybe 15 minutes for going through any of your questions. So type them anytime as they occur to you. So otherwise, thank you very much, Jack and Mustafa, for joining us. Thank you very much to all of our audience for coming to listen. And I'm going to hand over now to Jack and Mustafa.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And thank you very much, Mustafa. Good to see you.
See you. Thank you for having me.
Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about some of the stories you've been reporting on this week and recently, some of the big stories that you've done?
I did quite a lot, like in the past week or two. As you know, as usual, I'm a journalist who write news stories, and news stories kind of break like almost every minute. So you end up writing 2-3 stories, sometimes just one big one in one day. So the last 2 weeks, last week, I have been like kind of more involved in what's going on around Jerusalem. There was lots of clashes between Palestinians and Israeli forces over kind of archaeological digging near a cemetery. There was like a celebration of the Prophet Muhammad's birth, which ended up in escalation and clashes at Damascus Gate. Also, this is one of the ancient gates of the old city of Jerusalem. I wrote a few stories about a visit by former US officials who worked during the Donald Trump administration, who came also to kind of launch a meeting or a center to promote normalization deals between Arab countries and Israel. And ironically, or like it was like in a controversial building, known as the Museum of Tolerance, which basically built on a part of like ancient cemetery also in Jerusalem, which has been condemned by Palestinian officials and also by international figures. So this is my what recently I have been doing. And yeah, yesterday, like I was also wrote a story about Israeli settlers like uprooting 300 olive trees in the West Bank, just when climate crisis need an extra push. So yeah, that was my week, and I'm like, after I finish this, will be talking to a lawyer to talk about a Palestinian citizen of Israel who was killed in Lud, which is a Arab-Jewish mixed city inside Israel during May, when there was like clashes, and to ask him that no one has been no one being held accountable for the killing of this guy. So I'm asking him why, and he's a lawyer. So this is will be my day after this event.
So you talked a little bit there about escalation, and obviously this event is about news in times of crisis. And when there is a really big crisis in the Middle East, often you see that process of escalation, don't you? I just wondered how you feel during those periods where you can see everything ramping up day by day.
Yeah, I mean, reporting about Palestine and Israel, I think it's the most challenging task for any journalist. One reason is that every day there is arrests, every day there is like these small attacks, incidents, that you as a journalist, you start to being fed up with it. So you will say, okay, if every day there's tens of Palestinians being arrested by Israeli forces, so you will write a news story about it today, and tomorrow there will be another dozens of them being arrested. So you're gonna write another news about them. So as a news organization, as a journalist, you kind of started, because it's happening daily, it started to feel not as a news, but in the same time it's a news. And it's obviously, it's a news when after 3-4 months there will be big clashes like what's happening in last May. For readers who did not follow up what's going on, they will think, oh, what a surprise, that why this happened. But if you look on a daily basis, there is small dots, there's small events that leads to this, these clashes or these confrontation between Palestinians and the occupation forces. In terms of how I feel, it's very hard question to answer. It's all sorts of feelings, but I think my main task is basically to get facts for the readers, and I'm not, Also, I'm a Palestinian, and I was born and raised in Jerusalem. When I write a story, I don't ask the reader to side with any side, if you know what I mean. It's just, I'm giving facts. I trust my reader. I trust that the reader is smart, and whoever wants to get more information, he can or she can go and get it. But I'm giving them a fact about what's going on. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, when I wrote about Israeli settlers uprooting 300 olive trees in the middle of an olive harvest, I just gave facts, how many Palestinians, almost 100,000 Palestinian families depend on the harvest season of olive trees. I gave facts, that 10,000 of them has been uprooted since the beginning last year. So the reader, whoever who is they will kind of read the story, get the facts, and then they make their own opinion. So it's just you're also a journalist. When we write stories, kind of emotion and opinion, and I would say this has been to go to another section, not the section of news. You go to analysis news, go to opinion, and so on. So I feel, but my feeling after each day is satisfaction. Satisfaction for being got the message or the voice of the people, reported about stories that has never been reported in English speaking media. So it's it's actually a satisfaction despite all the hardship, despite all the lots of sad news, I have to say. But that's a conflict that has been going on for almost 70 years now, more than 70 years.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your news gathering process? You mentioned it a little bit there, and you obviously mentioned that you're going to be speaking to a lawyer later. But can you tell us a little bit about how you go about covering a conflict from afar?
Of course, if you want to speak about news, how I get it exactly, it's wires. Yeah. You have Palestinian and Arab wires agency. So this is what the first main source. Second is social media. You get lots of stories on social media. And this is the first layer of news. Then you build on it, like you speak with contacts on the ground, whether they are activists, lawyers, politicians, or just normal people affected by the incident, like farmers, a mother who her son or her daughter was arrested. So, and also our Hebrew media that also report the kind of sometimes the facts, what the Israeli police saying about this or what the Israeli army is saying about it. So, you get both sides of the story to write about it. So in terms of gathering news, I don't think it's very different from any other news, like reporting about Britain or France or Spain. It's the same, but the bonus is that I have lived there and I know exactly the situation. And when I report, for example, about a settlement, I know that exactly where this settlement sits and why it's so important that they want to expand it and how it will affect the community around it. While probably someone who's not familiar with the geography, the space of the West Bank and Palestine and Israel, they will not exactly know where this checkpoint sits and why this separation war runs from this. So it needs effort. Whoever wants to write or report about Palestine needs to visit the country in order to understand where, what the locations.
So do you think you see a big difference between the way that Western media cover the conflict and the way that local media cover the conflict?
Yes, definitely. Local media has more knowledge. They have more insights. Western media, or not just Western media, English-speaking media, let's say, even you have English-speaking media that it's like funded by Arab countries or like Muslim countries. So it's not just Western media like here in the West or the US. So because they, it takes knowledge to report about this topic, and you need reporters, you need journalists sitting in the newsroom and editors as well that knows about the topic to write about. So yeah, I feel the difference when I, like, for example, I read an article like in in English, like let's say British newspaper, and one in like Lebanese or like even Saudi Arabian one or Qatari. Yeah, there is lots of like the level of detail and understanding is much higher than the one in the English speaking in general. Like I don't want to.
And I think we spoke previously about the role of agency wires.
Yeah.
Do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, I was when I started. I came. I just a little background from where I came to like writing and report in English. I originally I write also in Arabic. Like I also report in Arabic, and this is my background. And when I came to like me also being a poet, like very have like attention to words and the structure of language and the verbs and objectives and so and all these small details. And when I came to like started writing in English, like I will just see how the wires, the news agency, the big news agency, has so much impact on the way Palestine and Israel is being reported in terms of language, in terms also of how you see the angle of the story. So sometimes you will read it that it has been totally written, or the like the Israeli army or the Israeli police spokesperson statement has been totally written as a wire story, and this will be picked up by many newspapers. Not mainly also to do with like lots of load work on a newspaper. Some, like will just copy and paste a wire story, a news agency story, and publish it without even having to rewrite it or like to examine the facts that it's happening, that it's stated it. So yeah, I saw lots of like the impact of news agency on writing about Palestine.
Do you see any prospect for that changing? Obviously, the digital age has changed journalism hugely. Do you think digital journalism, obviously, it creates the possibility to run many more stories, potentially to hire more diversely, and you see obviously a greater diversity of outlets as well. Do you think there's any prospect for that changing? Do you think there's any chance that in the future you might see more specialism and less copy and paste?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, or I hope so. But the place I work with, we succeeded in just overcoming or like skipping news agency when it's come about Palestine, Israel, and also social media helped a lot in like getting these small details, the voices of the people. I will give you an example. For example, in May, when the Palestinians has been like threatened to be expelled from Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which is a very strategic neighborhood that sits on the north of the city, and the Muhammad and Muna al-Kurd, who are two siblings who speak fluent English, and they are in their early 20s. They use social media to tell people what's going on, and most people did not rely on news agency to like hear their story. They actually went to their own social media account to hear it. So yes, I hope so. And also online or digital media before, because you can just click publish wherever. Sometimes you can just wait 2 hours, in order to get the fact right. While if you are a printed newspaper, you need to get it now. So you will copy and paste the Wire's story and just publish it next day. While as a digital media, you can now read that they have published about it, and go do your own research. Like go look at what the Israeli media said, what the Palestinian media said. If there is someone involved, go look at their social media account and get the facts right. So you can like spend 2 hours, 3 hours calling people and get all the facts right and just publish it. I know it will be like 2 hours delay, but still will be original story that, get the facts right, get the right narratives, and inform people, tell them exactly what's happening. And also you'll probably get the good picture as well, which is very important and sometimes is missed from when news agency publish a story, which is very important to attract readers, the pictures and photos.
It was recently reported that Facebook's algorithm now scans news stories for content that appears elsewhere on the internet. So in other words, you get demoted within the Facebook algorithm if you're just copying and pasting from the agency wires or from public statements. Do you find that your more original stories that are a product of your own unique journalism do better online than the ones that are a bit more tied to material that everybody has?
It depends on the story. Some stories, and it also depends. This is always a debate. I speak with one of my colleagues who is like work in audience engagement. Sometimes I write a story like in an hour, and it will get thousands of shares. And sometimes I will spend. They will give me like a 2 day. 2 days to work on it, and we'll get like, I don't know, 500 or 600. So it depends. It also depends on the mood of the reader. Sometimes readers doesn't want like to read, like especially like when it's Friday or like Saturday. They don't want to look at their phones, while probably they like to look at their phones on Tuesday and Wednesday to distract themselves from work or like so. It depends. It depends, and this is one of the questions that I never managed to get an answer, and I never managed to like find the jackpot that just like always win. You know, sometimes you will get like thousands of shares, and sometimes no. It depends.
I feel that journalists everywhere feel your pain on the story that you spent 2 days on not getting read by as many people as the story you spent an hour on.
Yeah.
Israel-Palestine is a subject that obviously provokes huge and incredibly fierce debate, and often accusations of bias, sometimes from both sides of the same news organization. Overall, do you think that news media can make a positive contribution in times of crisis? Do you have a kind of optimistic or pessimistic view of the media's contribution?
No, definitely media has a huge impact, and it can, it can do lots of change, I believe, and I see in many, or I met many like of my journalists or colleagues who really like kind of wants really to change, and I think the best thing, the best way to change is basically write a great story. A great news story or a great article. Just write it really good and it will change. But don't try to change. Write it really good and it will change by itself. Like let it stand. And when it stands like as a good piece, it also stands time, people read it after 10 years. And I saw many of my reporting, to my surprise, that has been quoted in books, like referenced. Like I know that because from time to time I Google my name, as probably many people do. So yes, I think it changed, and I felt that some of my stories changed. Like I will give you an example. I wrote a few stories about Saudi Arabia banning or trying to restrict Palestinians who had a certain travel document, from going to do the pilgrimage, Al-Hajj, and Al-Umrah, which is kind of a small Hajj in Mecca. And that story was like widely shared and widely read. And after a few months, Saudi Arabia basically just canceled all these new restrictions or like new policy or rules. And, I really felt good. And one of my colleagues, he told me, I think because of you, they changed their mind or something like this. I mean, I doubt it, but it's nice also to feel that, yes, you contributed to it.
Yeah, definitely. And what about the kind of spin that you get in reporting conflict? Do you think that you can see efforts to manipulate the media on either or both sides? And how do you deal with that as a journalist?
In terms of manipulation, you mean me as a person or the other side?
So let's say, for example, I mean, we did talk a little bit about the dependency on the agency wires and how the agency wires focus on official statements from, say, the Israeli police or the Israeli army. Do you think that you can see a kind of like a PR machine trying to influence public opinion and on either side, I've obviously mentioned Israel there, but on either side. And as a journalist, how do you kind of try to get past that, that PR or spin in the way that you report?
I mean, generally speaking, every media has like a PR side of it. There is no doubt about it. Whoever tell you is 100% independent, that's not true. In every country, in every media platform. So I will give you an example, which is basically, let's say, an Israeli police statement says, 1, 2, 3. Basically, they want to send a message that, Palestinians attacked Israelis, and that's why, you should side with the Israelis and hate the Palestinians. So how I move around it is just basically tell the facts. And if, for example, Palestinian hurted Israelis, like throw a stone at them, I will put it, I will just state it as well. But I will never use the point of view of the Israeli side or even the Palestinian side. I will use the point of view from like the reader. I will be like I will read it as someone wants to know more about it. I'll just tell the fact. And like recently when the clashes happened in East Jerusalem, Palestinians were like celebrating the kind of religious ceremony, and suddenly clashes erupted. Some of them has been arrested and beaten, and some of Palestinians throw stones on an Israeli bus and injured too. 17 Palestinians also has been injured. So I told all these facts without, trying to make you feel, you as a reader, if you want to feel with the Palestinians, you will feel with them without me telling you. And if you want to feel with the Israelis, also you'll feel with them. So it's just, it's also this is one of the things also I also speak with all my colleagues that, many people, because they grow up in a certain family or a certain community, no matter what you write, you try to convince them with something, they will never be convinced because they have their own beliefs and their own, let's say, hopes and their own, imagination and so on and so on. But many people change, many people change and change through facts to, educate themselves about what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke a little bit before about, your work being included in books and so on. And obviously news stories in the modern world do have a life beyond the moment of publication. Do you see the content you produce debated on social media? Is there are there social media communities who try to almost lobby you and try to influence your coverage? Do you have a kind of like ongoing engagement with the social media communities around Israel, Palestine, and the wider Middle East?
Yeah. I mean, I quit Twitter in 2020 because I couldn't just stand to be on this platform. I felt it's a very toxic platform and it was not right for me. And I quitted it. And I never been like, let's say, bullied or like being pushed by any on any social media to do this or that. But I mean, my relationship with social media is not that I depend on it 100%, because there is lots of fake stuff on it, whether photos, whether videos, whether statements. There is lots of fake news around, and you need to be careful, really careful, not to depend on it. That's why I go to like official news agencies, like basically run by government. At least, I know it's by government, but at least I know it's not fake. It's a statement that it's original. This minister said this and this MP said that. So, but I like social media. I now try to open. I'm really terrible at social media. I would like someone to teach me how to run a public page on social media. I opened one on Facebook that it seems is doing really bad at the moment, but I hopefully will kick. Will fly soon.
So when you get stories from social media, what social media platforms are you using there?
Mainly Twitter and Facebook. Is the main two.
Yeah. Okay. So you didn't get bullied personally, but what? So obviously you've said it's a toxic platform, which is certainly not a niche opinion. I think probably a lot of people would agree with you.
But this is my opinion, my experience.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw that was toxic? So what was going on there that you were reacting to?
There is lots of graphic images that you see it unprepared. Especially, for example, you want to you want to find Gaza, you put Gaza on Twitter search, and you will see lots of Palestinians killed during the Israeli bombing, that you are not prepared to see it. There is lots of I would say, you write, or people on the platform tweet or write in order to impress, and in order to impress you need to use sharp language, punchy language. You try to steer a debate or steer harsh argument that, why, why to spend time like doing it. I mean, this is my experience, and actually, I didn't feel like I lost a lot by not being on Twitter, because I still read the news and still read articles. And the nice thing also that most newspapers and news sites, they have like a social media department or section on their website that there is like few journalists who is being hired basically to go on social media and to write stories, what's trending. So I read these stories and I know what's trending. So I like 80%, 70%, I feel I'm still in the loop and what's going on social media.
Yeah, so you're talking about SEO journalists there, I think, who look for trends and then try to kind of catch the rising hot air and get lots of traffic against it. That's very interesting. So do you think social media then, that toxic environment, what impact do you think it has on the wider conflict of people's understanding? And I'm also kind of thinking about identity as well, because if you're somebody who's from Gaza, but you're not in Gaza, you can't even search for your own home country, you can't even search for your own home area without seeing all of that come up. I mean, what impact do you think that has?
I mean, for normal people, definitely is very, hard for them to see. And I'm telling you also about, I was mentioning fake news. Once, I did a story about, names and faces of victims that were killed during an Israeli bombing. Not the recent one. I think it was 2019 or in 2020. I can't remember exactly, because there was lots of the incidents. And mistakenly, I put like I was not knowing that it was a mistake, but I used two pictures that I saw on social media of the names of those guys that have been killed. And I received an email the next day, from their families saying, they were not killed, and but their pictures were published everywhere. So it is shocking for them, and it's also it's like a big mistake on my behalf, or at that time. So I mean, social media is it has been like increasingly used in order to like tell the story about Israel and Palestine. And I think Palestinians managed to use it very smartly and very effectively last May. And the reason is Palestinians has been like their voices has been blocked from reaching mainstream media, especially in the West, in the UK and the US. So the only platform they can tell their stories on is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and they have been working on it in the past few years. Whoever was a beginner YouTuber in 2016, now she has 5 years experience. They can tell it perfectly. The same on Instagram and Facebook. That's why you see most, but also social media platform. There was lots of articles about how they blocked Palestinians, deleted their content, and also I wrote a story about it. How Palestinians and Arab started to use ancient Arabic writing in order to dodge the algorithm of Facebook. So the Arabic writing has dots in it. So before the early writing of Arabic has no dots. So in order people to challenge the algorithm and to beat it, they wrote like in Arabic, "Death to Israel," but without any dots. And if you go now and write it as it is without dots, you will still get the posts on Facebook, and on Facebook, I don't know about other platforms, and I wrote an article about it, how like Palestinian Arab activists like revitalized, brought back a dead way of writing into life again. It's like it was amazing, this one.
So are you talking there about ordinary people, or do you mean kind of more, are you talking about organizations? Like, but how organized are
ordinary people, but people who work, let's say, with choreography, and they made special websites, because the keyboard has dots when you write in Arabic. So, I can go on this website and write whatever I want, and that website will translate or transform it to early modern, early way of writing. And you will just copy and paste, and the algorithm will not spot you wherever you write. And the funny thing that as a modern reader, you will understand totally what has been written, because you.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Another example of how digital technology both empowers and disables and changes everything. It's obviously, like you said, I mean, the conflict's been going for about 70 years. Do you see any hope for the future? Do you think we'll ever get to a point where we don't have to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict anymore?
I mean, I hope so. I think it's, the conflict has been, ever since, like even before, like 48, there was lots of conflicts, and I mean, it's very hard to tell you what I think this will end up. I think everyone has their own thinking about how this conflict will end, but in order to understand more the conflict, you need to see where Palestine sits, where Israel sits in the geography of the Levant, and between Egypt, and Syria and Iraq. And if you look at this region, mostly what we call it Greater Syria, which is basically Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and modern day in Syria and Iraq. This geography has always been open. There was no borders. From my stories, from my family, my grandfather used to work in Baghdad, and he would just travel to Amman, and other families, you hear stories, they were traveling to Beirut and Damascus and Aleppo, or go to Kuwait. They used to travel there as you're traveling from London to Manchester, or from Liverpool to London, or Bristol. It's like one country, or it doesn't have to, it's not one state, but as a country, as a geography, is one country. And I think ending the Israeli-Palestinian Arab conflict is without taking consideration what's going on in the whole region, it's not going to end. And the only way to end it is for these countries to open together, to be like one country one day, and this is how it will open. Otherwise, it will carry on. The conflict will carry on, and unfortunately, for the foreseen future, it will carry on, because there is no indication that it's gonna stop unless the Americans, which they have huge leverage over Israel, tell them to stop. Basically to honor what they have signed in 1993, which is the Oslo Accord, the peace deal with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, to withdraw from the West Bank, and to take all the settlers out and all the military forces out. And I can't see why the Israelis would do such a thing.
So obviously a lot of the peace process in the 1990s was during the Clinton era, and we now have a Democratic president again. Do you think that might change the future, the immediate future?
I mean, it might. I mean, also one of the things about U.S. policy, or that each president wants to show that he can solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. there's something, that they can do it. So I don't know, it's very hard. Also, the thing about, the Americans, they say something and they do something else. It's just all of it diplomacy. It's just like a game of chess. What
Yeah, indeed. So I think we're going to go to the Q&A now, if that, unless there's anything you just quickly want to say to round things off before we do.
No, let's go on Q&A.
Fantastic. Okay, so to start with, there's an interesting question from Gillian Kelly, who says she is a reporter as well. How do you feel about the famous phrase about our industry? Often a reporter's best day is somebody else's worst or last day. When reporting on conflict, is this particularly the case? It's a buzz working on big stories, but it can also be personally upsetting. Where is your line?
It's just the first bit of the question, I missed it.
Oh yeah, no problem. So she says she's a reporter as well. So there's a famous phrase, often a reporter's best day is somebody else's worst or last day. So in other words, you might get a buzz at reporting on let's say the military go into Gaza or the West Bank. Is obviously going to be a huge amount of frenzied reporting. And is there an adrenaline rush to that? Does it feel conflicting if people are suffering as a result?
I mean, there was no best day for me, like to report about a killing or like a massacre or anything like that. It was very, very hard. But one of the things also about journalism and being a reporter is like you feel. I don't want to say that you lost feeling, but there is like it's just like because you see lots of bad news that you still have the sympathy, but in the same time you need to do your job. And I never thought about my job that it's like. By the way, not all the news I write is about like people being killed or like arrested. I wrote about poetry. I write a few articles. Also, I write about, let's say, diplomacy and kind of diplomatic conflict between, like, let's say, Saudi Arabia and other countries, or like Jordan, internal conflict, protests. So I never thought that it's like it was the best day when writing about like someone's last day.
Yeah, of course. So we have another question from Maya. How do you balance between freedom of speech and the requirements of professional reporting, and then say your personal safety? So are you ever kind of on the ground, or do you ever feel that your personal safety is at risk while you're reporting?
I'm very aware of this safety risk, and I kind of when I reported from the ground, but mainly I'm sitting in an office. So like when I speak with sometimes I will be a commissioning editor, like help the shift leader to commission stories. So when I report something about when I commission someone from Iraq, for example, like I'm aware if they have to be safe in order to report a story. So myself, I have been on the ground, but not as much as my other colleagues who were reporting on the ground. The safety is like a priority for any journalist. I don't think any journalist has to put themselves at risk, in order to report a news story. Honestly, it's not worth it. If someone will be killed or shot or kidnapped just for writing a story. And this here we go also, the place you work, the organization you work in, it also bear responsibility. It's not just your decision. And I advise any like young reporters or whoever wants to go into media, don't put yourself, your life at risk to report news. Is not worth it. And there is lots of news stories. You can do it. And if there is like you want to write something that is too risky, should be like in a structure or framework where you have support and people who know how to deal with in these situations, because these are very scary and probably life-changing events. If someone will be kidnapped in somewhere, and even for a few days, that's really a terrible thing.
And is there any I know that there are in Britain there are hostile environment training courses. To the context that you work with and the people you commission stories from, do they get an opportunity to train, or are they a bit more kind of have a go freelancers?
I actually don't know exactly if they got trainings. I deal with lots of them, but some of my colleagues did like training courses to deal with terrible, situation.
Yeah. Have you ever found your stories to be in dialogue with misinformation or fake news? Which I think you did touch on a little bit when we spoke, but if there's anything else that you can say on that.
I mean that some fake news went into my story without me noticing.
So I'm just going to let Hannah answer that because it was her question.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jack. No, I meant certainly not suggesting that fake news gets into your stories. No, but that a kind of spiral, or what's the word, escalating, or that you find that you're writing on a subject, and then you discover that there is counter points of view out there that are circulating that are misinformative on the same subject. That's what I meant by in dialogue with.
Yes, few stories, like I would write something and someone will tell, I will read like on Reddit, for example, or Twitter, that some other people are suggesting other like they think it's factual, but it's not factual. Like there is nothing to support it. But I'm not, and I have never been bothered by it. It just because I saw it not just as a reply to my story, but my colleague and some people I also follow and read and admire their work. And so like it's just like a kind of a public debate, and I find it entertaining, and it's also good to read, and also good to hear the other people point of view, even if they were like misinformation or not true.
That makes sense. So next question. We're thrilled you're able to speak here today. You've mentioned that in the past your media appearances have seemed to be interfered with or prevented from happening. Can you tell us about that?
My media appearances being interfered
with or prevented from happening.
Did I say that?
If it's not striking a chord, let's move on to the next one. So I'm really interested
I've never
in what
been
you said.
prevented from appearing on any place. Did I? I can't remember, but I never like.
Fair enough, no problem. So the next question, I'm really interested in what you said about social media, as well as earlier on the feeling for language and the role of local knowledge, understanding references, knowing the spaces where these events are taking place. Could you talk a little more about how language, translation skills, personal experience, and knowledge of space matter when using social media for news gathering? Or putting it another way, is it problematic if reporters who do not have those skills use social media for stories?
Okay, I will. There's like few questions in this question. One is about the language, and one is about using the social media.
So shall we start with
the language? What strikes me is adjectives. Like we'll just like speak about someone who is like just a terrorist. That's it. There is no like consideration whatsoever like before, like try to frame, to just try to see what happened before framing it. Just you can frame it, but at least to know what happened. So language, like like loaded language, let's say, like that, it is too much heavy, like whether like describing, try to depict someone like as evil, let's say, and or try to depict someone as good. But both of them are loaded language. Like you have like a previous, or like you basically made up your mind what's going on here. So this is the language I find, and in terms of social media, which is social media is amazing, but you need how to know how to do it, how to deal with it. And everyone seems has different opinion on social media. So I like Facebook, to use Facebook, despite all the criticism of Facebook, and I don't like Twitter at all. But I have colleagues who like Twitter and hates Facebook. So it's just I don't know, like it's a personal choice. But I think it's important for journalists and reporters not to rely on social media to read the news, because sometimes you find yourself spending 4 hours or 5 hours just scrolling on Twitter, while you can, these 3-4 hours, you read like 5 articles, like from different platforms, and actually you get knowledge. You read an opinion, someone who's like an MP, or someone who is an activist, or like or a reporter in Iraq or like in Libya, actually telling you, and instead of like reading tweets or like posts on social media.
And just to expand one aspect of the question, so because it mentions translation skills, so obviously you are not just an Arabic speaker, but Arabic is your first language. And I'm aware through my failed attempts to learn Arabic that there is a lot of dialect in the Middle East. Do you think having Arabic as your first language gives you an edge on people who have tried to, maybe people who are English speakers who have tried to learn Arabic?
Never felt it, actually. I speak Arabic, and also I speak Hebrew and I read Hebrew, and also a little bit of French, that I can read it and understand it. I used to speak it, but I forgot it. Yeah. And language is very important. Like it's like a great skill. Honestly, a great skill for journalists, because some of my colleagues will come and ask me to help them, like for example, call someone to interview in Arabic, because they know once I speak with them in Arabic, they will open up. I can get more details and understanding of what's going on than if they spoke with them in English, even though the other side, they speak English, but still. And yes, so translation also is very important in our work. It's whether a statement, sometimes you will see a statement that has been translated into English on like in articles, but when you will go and read it, it's actually inaccurate. They're sometimes being like, it's like, it doesn't have to betray it, but still not inaccurate. So, it's good, having like a language, it helps you to go to the original source, and read it and know about it or listen to it.
And then I think this is the last question, I believe. Would you ever consider moving away from short pieces and working on a book or a documentary? And if so, why? And if not, then why?
Yeah, of course. I always like, it's very hard, not because I don't want, I have 2 kids, and, I have full-time job, and, but I always think that I should write a book. This is something in my mind. And I think the right time will come when I will write it, hopefully like in near future. But exactly what, maybe whoever, you can't tell me what book you want me. Right.
I was going to ask you whether you had any ideas for it, but I suppose you're writing fiction as well, so maybe you have something to
I had few attempts, but I stopped. But I'm really interested in aviation, like in the Middle East. This topic, like, I'm reading about it more and trying to learn more about it. The airports that used to work and stopped working, and the connections as the Middle East was through airport and stopped. This is an interesting topic, and people like to read stories about aviation. Anything to do with flights, the story will fly as an arrow.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to hand back to Hannah to see if she has any final thoughts she wants to share.
Well, I just really want to say thank you to both of you, and especially Mustafa for sharing a really powerful combination of professional expertise and personal experience. For that reason, we're really lucky to have you share that with us today. It's been a fantastically wide-ranging conversation as well, with insight into this specific conflict, but also so much more kind of broad perspective on the future, or the present and future direction of news industries in general, and the mediation of global events. So thank you, and thank you of course to Jack as well for your expert interviewing. Thank you to all our attendees as well. Really appreciate you coming. We have another event next month on hidden labour, women's labour in the Swedish film industry, and then we have an interview with a novelist in December. We've got basically lots of brilliant things happening, so do follow our socials or sign up to our newsletter to find out more. And otherwise, thank you all for kicking off our monthly seminar in such great style. Have a great Friday, everybody. Have a great weekend.
And thank you for having me, and thank you, Jack, for this great interview. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm gonna awkwardly wave and then end the session for everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.